I heard he was a mute, and the clapping's how he communicates. I heard he's a ghost, and the clapping's how he gets your attention. I heard you're both big old babies who will believe in anything. Daryl and Gary looked up incredulously at me as I grinned back at them from across the lunch table. Oh yeah? Well, he's been linked to the disappearances of like 4 kids now, so sounds like a pretty good reason to be afraid to me, Daryl said, sounding mad. I just shrugged at him, popping a french fry into my mouth and savoring the salt. There's no proof that this clapping man is responsible for a candy bar going missing at Dell's, let alone Mike Frazier getting snatched. The clapping man story was something that had been circulating for a while. 3 young kids had gone missing first, all of them heading home from somewhere or another, and some of the witnesses had reported hearing a clapping sound before they had gone missing. One of them had even reported seeing a man shape in the woods before hearing the clap. They didn't have any details about the guy, but they said it looked like a person's shadow with long arms. Mickey had been the most recent disappearance, and the one that made the cops around Tiger the most nervous. The first 3 had been younger kids, elementary school students who hadn't looked like much, but Mickey had been a 17-year-old farm kid who was built like a linebacker. The story was that he was trying to find one of his dad's missing sheep around dusk and had just never come back. The stories were that he was near Kindle-covered bridge and that the sheep had been found dead underneath it the next day. There were the usual rumors that Mickey had run off or left with some girl, left with some boy for all they knew, but those of us who had known Mickey kinda doubted it. Mickey was slow. Not like special ed slow, but he was slower than average. He loved his family. He loved working on his parents' farm, and the thought that he would just run off when he couldn't come back with the sheep was laughable. Mickey liked football too, but if his dad had asked, he would have given it up in a heartbeat. The cops knew this too. That's why they were sure that Mickey had been taken by someone, and that someone had to be big. The bell rang then, but we kept our seats as the good little sheep dispersed around us. We'd leave when the monitor finally told us we had to, and not a minute before. Gary still looked a little nervous as the cafeteria cleared out, but Daryl was pretty used to it. Daryl and me had been hellions since we were young, but it was a life that Gary was slowly getting used to. I'm not a bad kid. Not really. I love my mama, I respect my daddy, and I keep my truck well maintained. I'm good to my girl, when I have one. That being said, I have no time for weakness or rules. The only rule I know is that the strong rule, and it's a rule that I learned from my daddy. If I'm strong, and I am strong, I should be able to do what I want. If other kids don't understand that, well, that's their problem. Just like when I push them down and show them who's boss. Daryl, Gary, and me never really considered ourselves a gang or nothing, but we pal around because we all believe that when you're strong, you're right. Miss Gladys looked our way, and I grinned at her and waved. Miss Gladys is cute, but she ain't strong. She teaches home ec, and she drives a Spark. Nothing about that says strong. She's come over before and tried to talk nice to us to get us back on the straight and narrow, but it never does any good. Eventually, she stopped trying, and when she turned to call Mr. Gersh, the shop teacher, we took to our feet and cleaned the table off, heading for class. Gersh was strong, an 8-year combat vet with scars to prove it, and he was not to be messed with. We were halfway to class when the bell rang for the start of 5th period, and I looked at the boys and told them I thought we should maybe take the rest of the day off. I gotta get to math, Gary said. If I don't keep at least a C, they'll kick me off the football team. Same, Daryl said with a sigh. If I don't pass history test today, my mama says I can't run the roads this weekend. Come on, man, just come to class with us. Beer'll still be there after school. I blew a big old raspberry at him and told them that if they wanted to be pansies, then I'll go drink it all up before they got there. They begged me not to go, but I was done for the day. School had never really held any appeal for me, and I'd already figured I'd drop at the end of the year and go on to hauling lumber like my uncle, or go to farming like my dad. I was too dumb for the army and too lazy for college, but at least I'd figured it out a year before anybody else. "Have fun in class, then," I said, waving as I walked to the parking lot to get my truck. The little Ford Ranger that Daddy had given me wasn't much, but it was fine for now. I really wanted one of those big old F-350s like my uncle had, but I'd either have to save up a bunch of money or steal one to have something that nice. The Ranger was fine, and I slunk out of the lot in low gear before turning and flying up the road for home. The dirt roads of Tiger were like a second home to me, and as I put the schoolhouse behind me, I thought again about just leaving on one of them for parts unknown. What was there really here for me? A dead-end job and a naggy wife, squalling kids and a mortgage I couldn't pay, a bottle of beer after work with the boys, a loveless marriage that would hang like a shackle around my neck, maybe a trip to Stragview if I wasn't careful, or a telephone pole in the night if I'd had a few too many beers. I didn't like to think too much about the future then, preferring to live in the moment, and just this particular moment was about to contain a 12-pack of beer. I pulled up behind the barn so Daddy wouldn't see me if he came home early. Daddy was at the farmer's market till around 4 selling his wares, and I figured he wouldn't be the wiser of me cutting school. I walked off into the field of peanuts, this year's crop, and on into the woods beyond. I'd been exploring the woods since I was potty trained, and the spot I knew of was about a mile back in the old tangle of trees. Daryl and me had found it when we were still small enough to squeeze between the roots of the snaky trees and make a clubhouse down there, and it now served as a spot for us to drink and smoke and bring girls to for some privacy. The forest was familiar, an old friend that had protected me sometimes when Daddy had a little too much to drink, and before I knew it, I could see the old growth of trees in the distance. Most of the forest was thick old oaks and scaggy little pulp trees, but the grove was different. It was old, felt ancient somehow, and being there made me feel peaceful, like nothing could hurt me while I was there. I got to the snaky trees and took a seat on the comfy old roots that stuck above ground, reaching into the gnarled old root system and pulling out a 12-pack of Budweiser. I cracked the first can and drank it quickly, smacking my lips as the crisp taste filled my stomach. This was the good life right here, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. I'd have to trade this kind of carefree time for adulthood soon enough, and the thought of saying goodbye to the snaky tree grove was a little sad. I opened a second one, drinking it slower this time, and as the wind rustled the leaves around me, I felt a yawn creeping up my throat. Daddy and me had been splitting wood before school today, and the early morning and the lukewarm beer was starting to make me groggy. As the second one disappeared and the third one popped open, I got comfy and watched the dragonflies and the little forest animals frolic in the boughs of the trees. I felt at ease, like I was floating, and when the beer can slipped out of my hand and fell into the nest of roots, I was snoring before it dumped its delicious contents on the ground. When I woke up, it was dark, and the sounds of birds and squirrels had been replaced with insects and the scamper of bats. This didn't immediately put me off. I'd been in the woods at night before. Daryl and me had camped out tons of times, and I'd even slept rough a time or two if Mama and Daddy were fighting. I pulled myself out of the tangle of roots and wobbled a little before getting my bearings. I wasn't drunk, not by a long shot, or hung over. I had taken a long nap in the woods, and now it was time to go home and face the music. The school would have called by now and told them I left early, and Daddy would be looking for me during evening chores and not finding me. These things would have culminated into him having a drink as he waited for me, so I was likely in for a bad time. I walked out of the grove, watching my step as I went, and that's when I first heard it. A loud pop sound that made me freeze in place and listen like a spooked deer. I stopped for a count of 5, waiting for it to come again, so I could identify it, but all I heard was the quiet sound of the evening woods. I started walking again, but after 5 more steps, I heard the loud pop again. I thought it might be a tree branch cracking at first, but now it sounded more like something familiar. It wasn't a natural sound, not like a branch breaking or a rock bumping as it fell. This was a sound I hadn't really heard out here before. A sound I was familiar with, but seemed alien out here. Sounded like someone bringing their hands together for a single hard clap. Kept walking towards the house, thinking I was hearing things, but the longer I went, the more I heard the clapping sound. It was infrequent, always that one loud pop, and when I looked, there was nothing I could find that would have made it. The longer I walked, the more freaked out I got at the popping. I found myself looking for man shapes in the woods, thinking about what the kids had told the cops. It was big, like someone's shadow standing in the woods. Its arms were longer than usual, and they'd heard a loud clapping sound before their friend had disappeared. I stopped again. It had been closer this time. Sounded like it was about 20 feet away, and the clap had silenced many of the forest creatures that had been buzzing placidly. I wanted to run, but I made myself walk so I didn't trip in a hole or knock myself unconscious with a low-hanging branch. There was also the fact that these were my woods. Nothing bad could happen to me in my woods. No one could hurt me out here. No one would dare to... Now it was closer. 10 feet or better. It was following me, and I was still half a mile from home. I wondered how far it would let me get before it snatched me. Would they find any evidence that I'd been alive? Would they ever find anything? I quickened my pace. Holes be damned. I needed to go. I needed to get out of here. I needed to be behind my door with the lock thrown and the bolt pushed in. I'd hug my daddy and tell him I was sorry and take whatever punishment came, but I needed to know that the monster or freak or whatever was outside couldn't get me. I ducked a branch that I saw as a vague outline and kept moving. The popping had stopped for now, but I knew I wasn't safe. I had to get home. I had to get home. I had to get... I turned my head in the direction of the sound, and there he was. He was man-shaped, that was for sure. He looked like a bulky fella, his arms and legs just thick outlines in the murk. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel him on me. He didn't make a sound, but the longer I stayed still, the more I could hear a low murmur, like a TV show trying to break through the static. I thought he might be frozen by my stare, but as I watched, he raised his hands slowly and brought them together with a single loud clap. I took off like a shot. I ran and ran and ran as the popping followed me. I expected that every step would be my last. A claw would come out, or a set of teeth would clamp down on me, and I'd be dragged away to whatever served as a den for the digestion, or God knew what else. The popping sound started coming from directly behind me, and I could feel the air of those massive hands. I could see lights coming into view up ahead, and I thought I might have gotten turned around and found the highway. I didn't care. I just wanted someone to help me escape this creature, and I wasn't choosy about who. I broke through the tree line to discover that I had come out at the edge of my parents' farm, and the lights were flashlights as people looked for me. They were calling my name as they got closer to the woods, and I tore off towards the field in an attempt to stop them from entering. One of them could have just as easily been the thing's next meal, and I wasn't about to draw them to it. I found Daddy first, his beam turning to fix me, and he wrapped me in a hug as he recognized me. "God damn, boy, I was so scared you'd been took." He hugged me close, the first time I'd ever seen my daddy show that kind of emotion, and when he called out to them that he'd found me, I saw them all start heading to his location. The police came and talked to me, and I don't know if they took me seriously or not. They told people to stay out of the woods for a while and listen for a clapping if they were alone. Mickey was the last kid to go missing in Tiger that year, and when the clapping came back after that, they seemed better prepared for it. That experience changed me, and I'm glad to say that it was for the better. I started taking my schooling a little more seriously, stopped being so impetuous, started helping people instead of taking, and changed my way of thinking a lot. I still believe that strong people are important, but now I also believe that they have a responsibility to help those who aren't strong. I started volunteering to go out and woodland rescue, searching for people who'd gotten lost or looking for remains, and I got approached by the Park Service to see if I wanted to work with them. Now I help educate people so they don't get lost, and I find people who have gone missing. In a way, I guess I owe the Clapping Man a debt. He saved me that night from becoming a monster too, though I doubt it was his intention. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my Ghostly Reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our Spooky Ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.